I know games got to make money, but there seems to be a huge disconnect between players and the shareholders. Not the players and the shareholders, I don't think. The representatives of the shareholders are the board of directors. And I think there's a disconnect between the player and the board of directors who represent the shareholders, or maybe upper management. You got to realize, like, upper managements. First of all, these companies are huge. And upper management in these companies are like legit executives, often from other industries that didn't come up through games necessarily, that didn't work on, like, they weren't line producers or game designers or artists. A lot of them, they're people that got MBAs from somewhere and then maybe worked in marketing or some other type of company and then became executives. They're excellent dressers, they're great speakers, they're very alpha, but they're not. A lot of them are just not gamers. Now they will tell you that they play a little bit of like Call of Duty or whatever, but for the most part, they're suits. They're not nerds. So that's just kind of the way these companies are. They're very different beasts. You used to go to EA back in the day, and we were just like scrappy, scrubby developer types walking around, and you'd see just all of these, corporate sharks in their black blazers and their designer black t-shirt and their designer jeans. Dirk Stryker. I spent 23 years working in management of various companies, including GM, Ford Motor Company, and now I'm here making video games. Yeah, and I'm at EA. Where's the party at? And so it was super annoying, just being like game developer dude walking around. We need to make that guy an NPC. We murdered Dirk Stryker. It's probably Dirk Stryker. Would he actually be a brigand? No, I see Dirk Stryker as somebody coming in. He'd come in here and, like, because we've got business people and factions that are sort of controlling trade and business, all sorts of shady characters and shit here in this city. So we'll see. Maybe Dirk Stryker will make an appearance. Was John Smedley actively playing EQ most of the time he was involved? I know he's seen as an anomaly since he played, at least Smedley was, and I would have to assume is, a gamer. But when I talk about executives at these bigger companies, that's not like the executives of SOE. The bulk of the people at SOE were really legit, decent folk while I was there. Like Russ Shanks and Smed, like even our vice president of marketing. I don't think he was. I don't know if he was that much of a gamer. I can't remember, but he was a rad dude and really gave a shit about, like, sort of what people. You know what I mean? Like, he was trying to keep it fairly legit. So I remember like the first EA I was going to. It was back. You got to realize, like 20 years ago, having a full sleeve wasn't as normal. People didn't have face tattoos and stuff for the most part. Every 17-year-old with their mom's credit card didn't have like full neck tattoos and shit. And so we had these short sleeves, like polo shirts with like Variant on them or whatever. And I was like, is it cool if my tattoos are showing? Because I'd actually been told that me having a full sleeve by one of the people on the team told me having a full sleeve and facial piercings might be frowned upon, like prevent me from getting on the team. Like, that's how weird it was back in the day. So anyway, I asked Don Vercelli, the vice president of marketing. I was like, is it cool if I got tattoos, at EA, or I mean at E3? And he was like, he has like this very gravelly voice, and he's just kind of like, what? Yeah, no, man, kids love that shit. They'll eat it up. That's great, man. It's just like, oh, okay, cool. But that was like an actual question back then. Was he in one of the big guilds like other devs were? Smed? I'm not sure, but I know he played the shit out of games. So, fun Smed story. My ex and I stayed up all night outside of a Target to get the first like run of Xbox 360s, and I can't remember if I called in like sick or said I wasn't going to be at work the next day or what the deal was. But I don't think I went to work the next day. So I'm at this Target all night waiting in line to get an Xbox 360, and right after I got mine and was like leaving because they were escorting some of us in to get them and then go. As we were walking out, I guess we had already paid there, and this is like 6 a.m. or something. Smed was walking in. He was like, oh shit, Smed, and I had all of the gear, with controllers, games, everything just piled up, and he's like, oh nice, you got one. I'm here to get mine as well. So I mean, he's that kind of dude, and there's pluses and minuses. He was CEO that had very strong opinions about what the game should be and stuff like that sometimes, and in a bigger company. So he wasn't necessarily there working on the game every day. And so sometimes he'd be like, don't do this or do this, and then we'd have to talk about it. But I mean, honestly, I found him to be a reasonable dude to sort of debate with in person, and a pretty good-hearted person who some people have complaints. Naturally, some people have their issues with him or whatever. But for the most part, I found him to be a decent dude. So, but then again, people have their issues with me as well. And before the project's all over with, I'm sure there'll be all sorts of stories the team can tell you about what a giant jerk I am too. Kimry said, worked at a bar at the same time as my first industry job. I had to wear long sleeves to cover my tattoo at the bar, not at the studio. Awesome change. Why do you think gaming has become so corporate? Do you think it's investors and office politics, or is there more to it? I feel like mainstream devs don't have the same vibe anymore, even the old ones that everyone used to love. People change over time, so I don't know. I mean, that's probably a factor. But to answer your question, when I got in the industry in 2000, it's when gaming was starting to either catch up or just surpass the movie industry in terms of box office revenue. I don't know how much does the movie industry make these days? I know the gaming industry is $200 billion a year industry. Game industry revenue. Games industry revenue will pass $200 billion in 2022. That's $200 billion. Movie industry revenue 2022. The movie industry, as of 2020, the U.S. movie industry is worth $91.83 billion. Box office revenue was only $2 billion. For perspective, Genshin Impact, which has been out just as a random that I tend to go to, Forbes, piss off, 2021, in just 6 months since release, Genshin Impact has reportedly crossed the $1 billion in revenue mark. So in 6 months, Genshin Impact made half of what the box office revenue was for 2020 in 6 months. So Fortnite has made what, a couple billion, couple 3 billion at this point. So the reason why gaming has become so corporate is because gaming is a massive, ridiculously profitable industry. $5 in net profit. I think they did better than that. I'm pretty sure they didn't spend billions making that game. So, and when you're dealing with that kind of money, you know what I mean? Like, you get money people get involved, right? It's no joke. I mean, it's one of those things where we talk about it and we're like, we can mention those numbers and they just kind of like, oh, okay, cool. That's a cool number. But you got to think, like, how much more money's involved in gaming now compared to the industry that, I mean, we know directors' names. We know a handful, everybody knows a handful of movie directors' names. You know dozens of actors and actresses' names. There's Oscars and shit. They're treated like golden gods walking among us in LA, right? Like, people give a shit about what they think about, like, global warming and nuclear proliferation and other things they have no concept of. And then here's gaming that basically just came and drank their milkshake. And we're competing with them for attention, right? We're creating IP. So it's not just a movie now that's like generating the IP that's going to generate the next set of toys or whatever, like a Star Wars. More and more you'll see that be stuff that comes out of gaming. But always seemed cool. Shame about all the hate and harassment received over what a game. I mean, that's one of the downsides to working in games for lots of folks. Game makes toys, makes films. How much money is in the Roblox and Minecraft and Fortnite IPs? Got to be redonkulous. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what did Roblox IPO at? Roblox, 30 billion. Valued at 30 billion. That's pretty crazy. When did it really start getting corporate? This will just be me talking out of my ass, but I'm assuming when the companies, like when EA and some of the existing companies that were smaller but sort of like staple companies when I was a kid, right? Because I remember playing Bard's Tales and Wasteland and all this other shit that came from EA, and it was just my assumption is as those companies continue to grow, and then probably as there's probably more sort of like mergers and acquisitions of smaller companies, that's when it started to get more corporate. And I can't speak definitively on like the evolution of a company like Ubisoft or anything like that. My assumption is it probably happened the same way, where it started as kind of a more of a core company, and then as it evolved and got bigger and bigger. I've seen this in other industries, right? Like I had friends in the skateboarding industry that as they went from being a couple $1 million a year skateboard company to being essentially a company valued at like 60-70 million, and they were a smaller company relative to the bigger companies, right? Like they would have to bring in people that actually understood how to handle that kind of cash. Now what they tended to do was they would bring in corporate people on contract for a year, and then my friend would basically work with that person the whole time they were there, learn everything that person knew essentially, and then they would just not renew the contract. That way they could keep the company as core as possible, because what they didn't want to do was either sell and then have the company not be core anymore, or get in more and more management that weren't skateboarders, and have the culture of the company change. Then they would no longer be core, and that was their shtick. So I think there's some of that kind of has to happen at times. But I mean, I saw it in my last company as well. The closer you get to a point where the original investors want to sell the company and like push that valuation as high as possible, the more the board of directors, who represents the interests of the shareholders, will look to get people with experience in things like, it's getting the company to the point where folks could exit, or where they can be acquired by a bigger company, etc. So, and right now, not right now, I'd say over the last like 5 years at least, if you look, big companies, especially not just out of like, not just out of Asia, but if you look at the bigger companies out of Sweden, Stillfront, I don't know if EG7 counts as this, but I would say yeah, because they do have a decent number of companies that they own now. Embracer Group, the company that was buying up the last company I was at, Nordisk Games out of Denmark. Like these companies are just gobbling stuff up, right? And the people that run those companies aren't necessarily gamers. A lot of them are bankers, or they'll have some executives that came up through the ranks or gamers or whatever. But for the most part, it's banking folks.